Marketed as the easy way to get around the pesky problem that you can't currently afford everything in your shopping cart, buy now, pay later services have revolutionized the way that we shop. And even though there's nothing inherently feminine about choosing to split a payment into 3 or 4 installments, globally, women are more likely to have buy now, pay later debt than men are, despite the fact that men actually have more debt overall. Today, we're unpacking how companies like Afterpay, Zip, and Klarna have made debt seem cute and why it's so successful in particular among young women.
Just giving a content warning that in this episode I discuss themes of domestic violence and financial abuse, mainly in relation to policies, but I just wanted to highlight that before you jump on in. If that's not something you feel comfortable listening to today, that's totally fine. You can head on over to my page and listen to something else.
December, every sign has its own mode. I was in love with the Sagittarius.
From the Diving Board is a show hosted by me, Charlichats, dedicated to decoding digital culture by unpacking the hidden politics behind the screen. The reason I actually was inspired to do this video was based on an article written by Annie Joy Williams for The Atlantic, which was called The Rise of Cute Debt. And in it, she kind of unpacks the hold of buy now, pay later services on young women in particular, covering kind of Gen Z and younger zillennials, let's say. She looks at this phenomenon from the sense of women trying to keep up with beauty standards and fashion trends, particularly influenced by social media and our peers and the kind of perpetual marketing that we face when we're on social media apps every single day. She says lots of our spending is driven by trying to keep up with our friends, not just the real ones, but also the parasocial ones that we follow. She quotes Chelsea Fagan from The Financial Diet. If you're watching my channel, I highly recommend watching her videos. She does incredible financial takes and also really interesting, like she did a deep dive on Sex and the City and whether or not it encourages really poor spending habits. I really enjoy her content. I think it's really fun and also quite educational from a financial perspective, which I think we really need more of, particularly as young women, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Chelsea says social media leads us to believe that every purchase we make now is sort of a micro expression of identity, whether it's the kind of smoothie that we're drinking or the place that we travel to or the bag we're holding. All of it is kind of an expression of the type of woman that we are. Now, social media has dramatically increased the extent to which we see advertising on a day-to-day basis. When I sporadically re-download TikTok, which if you know, you know, I have this habit of deleting it and being like, I'm never going back on there ever again. And then I get in my head and I'm like, oh, I should probably go and post on that to promote the pod. And then I go on it. And then because I say certain things like, I get shadow banned, I just get really frustrated and I leave it again. But every time I do re-download it, I've got to say probably over 70% of my feed will be an ad in some form of another, whether or not it be for fashion items, beauty products, travel destinations, and even buy now, pay later services themselves. We're constantly sold time and time again the idea that who we are is inextricably linked with the things that we have and how we externally present ourselves. It's been conditioned in women from a very, very early age. Particularly on social media, algorithms put us in boxes. If we wear a more put together outfit, maybe we give the allure of being sophisticated, old money, having their life in order. Or if we wear, exclusively pastel colored Pilates activewear, we'll be a Pilates princess who probably drinks green smoothies and has a 5 to 9 before her 9 to 5. Now, obviously, we don't actually think these things about individual people when we see them walk past, but I do think it does subtly give kind of an idea of what these people's lives look like depending on what they're wearing, literally. Then add in commentary that tells us what trends are now out and really cringe, and suddenly we're in a flurry trying to make sure that our wardrobe isn't daggy because those shoes we bought last season are no longer in fashion, and now we need to swap it out, shapeshift our entire wardrobes, otherwise we won't be able to keep up. A lot of people just want to fit in, whether or not it's with their friends or with their favorite influencers. It's a huge drive when it comes to our identity and our sense of value. There's a very specific iteration of this when it comes to women, and it's very broad and it's felt very strongly, particularly among young women, and that's the perspective that I can share and offer information on. However, if you are a man, a young man in particular, I would really love to hear your thoughts on the kind of influences and messaging that you get on social media and the level of pressure that you feel well to align and conform to certain standards by purchasing certain things. But when we absorb this kind of advertising on such a frequent basis, it's very easy to then immediately go online shopping and add as much to your cart as humanly possible before you see the checkout sum and realize, hey, maybe I actually don't have that much money in my bank account right now. Here's where buy now, pay later comes in. I sound like I'm doing an ad. I promise you I'm not. Buy now, pay later is designed to fix this problem, as they say. They market themselves to these big companies to try and address the issue of cart conversion. Consumers are going to be far more ready to click purchase if that upfront cost is a lot cheaper. By the same token, buy now, pay later then markets themselves to consumers as the safer way of accruing debt. Specifically, they market themselves as not having any interest rates when you have to make those repayments and if you make them late. The thing that they do not say specifically is that you can incur late fees, and you do incur late fees. In fact, a huge proportion of the revenue that these companies bring in is from late fees. And late fees can actually amount to anywhere from 20 to 50% interest rate, essentially, on those late payments. So it's really not the safer way of accruing debt at all. It's just their kind of sneaky way of marketing that to the younger consumer. And this is really effective as well because a lot of young people are actually really fearful of credit debt and credit cards. A lot less young people are using credit cards when it comes to their spending habits. So these ideas that are coming in to kind of take that place to make it feel safer and less scary and simpler are going to be very, very successful. And clearly they are. In fact, in her article, Annie Joy Williams wrote that although she grew up in a family that consistently warned her of the stress and concerns around credit card debt, she found herself in significant debt due to buy now, pay later services. She basically described the situation where she was a sorority girl. Sorority girl? Is that what are they called? Forgive me, I'm not American. But she was in a sorority, right? And she had a sorority formal coming up, and it was the first time she decided to use a buy now, pay later service. I believe it was Afterpay. Basically, what she did was she bought a whole bunch of different outfits with the intention of returning them all and just keeping the one so she could try them all on. She writes, "But if I promptly picked my favorite dress and returned the rest, I'd be off the hook for the second payment by the time it was due. My plan seemed foolproof. As long as I was prompt with my returns and consistent with my payments, I could have what I couldn't afford. Afterpay quickly became a habit." Now, she says this mentality is actually really, really common, particularly among Gen Z and Zillennials. She said that one of her friends actually racked up over $16,000 in debt to Afterpay, or buy now, pay later service, by the age of 27. These friends as well thought they could return all of their fashion and beauty items to just use the ones that they really liked. But of course, once they ended up getting everything in those fashion hauls, they realized, actually, they're all kind of great. I'm not going to return them. And so it became a habit again to just keep doing this, but ultimately not actually returning the items. In an article by Kat Zhang for The Cut in April this year, she spoke about Coachella and the use of buy now, pay later services for festivals as well, saying that up to 60% of attendees this year at Coachella used a buy now, pay later service to buy their tickets, which, by the way, can amount to over $650. And you can see why people would do this. The initial payment is actually only $49. There's usually an upfront additional fee to use the service of around $41. Many buy now, pay later service users actually start out by using it for fashion and beauty or tickets, for example, to big events and festivals, but it very quickly goes into essential services like groceries. When it comes to buy now, pay later services and food, over the last year or so, Klarna, which is one of the biggest buy now, pay later services originally set up in Sweden, partnered with DoorDash in the US, which sparked all the memes about like a buy now, pay later burrito, the burrito bond, paying for your burrito over a certain amount of months. Like, obviously kind of funny, but also very concerning given these payments are rather small for a burrito, but it really normalizes paying for things over an extended period of time and essentially being in debt for very minor payments. Now, CEO of Klarna himself, Sebastian Siemiatkowski, told CNN that it was, quote, unwise to use buy now, pay later for takeaway, which is ironic given he's literally the name of this partnership, right? Like, even if he didn't specifically set this up, he is responsible for it as CEO. His net worth, according to Forbes, is over $3 billion. So, US dollars, that is. So I feel like, once again, name an ethical billionaire, I will wait. I will wait. I'll be right here. In an article written by Tortoise Media entitled Eat Now, Pay Later, What Klarna DoorDash Deal Means for Debt and the Economy, Barney McIntyre essentially reports on the buy now, pay later industry at large and its growth projected in the future. And he says the global buy now, pay later market has grown tenfold since 2019, fueled by online shopping during the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and rising interest rates on other types of credit. And that Juniper Research says the buy now, pay later market could be worth almost $700 billion globally by 2028. And part of the problem is it's so simple and easy to sign up and use these services. Buy now, pay later has been described as frictionless, particularly by Dr. Julia Cook, who's a sociologist here in Australia. And she says that means that you don't need to tell the service what you're intending to use the buy now, pay later service for. You don't need to disclose your aims. And in many cases, the amount of compliance checking is actually quite low. There have also been a lot of concerns about potential coercion when it comes to setting up accounts, because there's a lot of lack of verification when it comes to your identity and whose account is being set up for who, which raises alarm bells about the potential for other people to set up an account on your behalf without your consent, obviously leading to potential for financial abuse and other concerning aspects of being taken advantage of, for example. This problem runs a lot deeper when it comes to the fact that more women are using buy now, pay later services than men, and it's a lot deeper than just the pressures to conform to a certain beauty standard. It gets quite dark quite quickly when you realize that a lot of these services are actually fundamentally profiting off of inadequate social security payments for the most vulnerable people in our society. I was looking into this and I wanted to understand more from the perspective of financial counselors and people who kind of work more with these groups of people who exist kind of on the edge of poverty lines and using these buy now, pay later services to assist them with essentials. And one of the most brilliant resources that I came across was a report done by Good Shepherd, which is a big charity here in Australia with a big focus on women, financial independence, and they actually have their own specific financial counseling that they offer to various populations here. So this report was really gold and a fascinating read. I'll link it obviously in the show notes and also on my YouTube, as I always do. Regarding buy now, pay later services, Good Shepherd essentially say outwardly that it's an industry built on financial precarity predominantly among young women. They say that it's not just fast fashion or fashion and beauty products that people are using buy now, pay later services for, but usually and often essential services, including groceries, but also baby products, children's clothing, utilities, petrol, and other basic needs. Good Shepherd has even found that many women who are fleeing dangerous situations like domestic and family violence rely on these buy now, pay later services in order for them to actually meet those essential payments and meet those needs, which highlights and is very explicitly stated by Good Shepherd, while we do have certain social security payments for people who are fleeing domestic violence, clearly they're inadequate to meet those women's needs specifically in order to survive and meet basic essential services. And what this does is it means that these buy now, pay later services can get already vulnerable people in further debt. In fact, Good Shepherd has done quite a lot of research with their own financial counselors, finding that 73% of their financial counselors have had at least one client who've missed essential payments or cut back on or gone without essential services just to pay back a certain repayment to a buy now, pay later service. They've outwardly said this is the commercialisation of social security. While many people are struggling below the poverty line, instead of the state assisting, which they do to an extent but clearly insufficiently, private companies are swooping in knowing they'll ultimately make billions off of people who can't afford to make those repayments. Billionaires are profiting off of debt and inadequate social assistance. It's so unethical, and it really makes you wonder, what level of capitalism are we in? Because this is insane. And I don't know how these people, these managers, these CEOs of these buy now, pay later services can sit in good conscience knowing that this is happening. But I really wanted to understand, why is it that women are more likely to use buy now, pay later services than men? Because I didn't quite believe that it was just because of this overarching kind of sense and conditioning that we have to conform with these social stigmas and social ideas of who we are, being tied to obviously our looks, beauty products and fashion products. I kind of felt like there was something more at play here, and it turns out there was. Good Shepherd went into this as well in their fantastic report, basically saying that it's not just the fact that buy now, pay later is specifically marketed to women as a kind of cute debt, and it's not just the fact that it preys on women who are trying to fit in with these social norms that require huge consumerist behaviors to keep up. But there's a far more systemic reason at play here. Women are more likely to earn a low income than men. They're more likely to be sole parents and have further responsibilities when it comes to caring for children and meeting all of their children's needs on top of their own. They're more likely to rely on social security payments as a primary source of income, which of course, if you have a family, is usually not quite sufficient. They're also more likely to undertake casual or part-time work, which places women at risk of consistently low or uneven incomes. This is really interesting because actually a lot of women say that they use buy now, pay later services as a kind of smoothing of their debt. If they have sporadic income coming in, for example, it's much more manageable to kind of even that debt over a period of time rather than having this upfront huge payment that they can't necessarily meet or pay at a given moment. But what I found really interesting was it's not actually just young women. In fact, Good Shepherd said there's been a growing trend over the last few years that women between the ages of 55 and 64 have seen a dramatic increase in the use of buy now, pay later services, which Good Shepherd says is likely due to the cumulative effects of employment discrimination at an older age, poverty following separation, low superannuation levels, and reliance on the very low job seeker payment, which is a social security payment here in Australia, before qualifying for the higher paying age pension. But on top of this, there's also an added discrepancy when it comes to financial literacy between men and women. And I think that this has to be added into the conversation as well. There's this study undertaken by the University of New South Wales, and they basically found that financial literacy in Australia has plummeted in recent decades, with far fewer students studying economics and a worrying decline in diversity among those who do. Now, they say this is particularly concerning given it's happening in a time of a cost of living crisis and a time where we really need those financial literacy skills in order to navigate our lives. And while Australia ranked in the top 10 countries for financial literacy in the world, 63% of Australian men demonstrate basic financial literacy compared with just 48% of women. Obviously, this isn't just due to like girl math and all of these online trends that make it kind of seem okay and normalize the fact that women don't really tend to understand mathematics and financial literacy as much as boys.
What is your girl math?
I'm not going to pay $20 for shipping. I'm just going to put something else in my cart that's $20 and get shipping for free.
Why pay for the shipping cost when you can get another item for free?
When we have these online trends that, of course, I understand they're ironic and they're silly, but it also does normalize financial illiteracy among women, and it makes a mockery of the fact that women ultimately, statistically, are less inclined to be good at things like maths and finance because we haven't been taught and we haven't had that kind of installation in our minds, as young children and as young adults, that it's actually a really fundamental and important skill for us to learn. I just think we have to hold these conversations side by side because financial literacy has a huge influence on this as well. Alrighty, so as I have been insinuating, in Australia actually we have introduced some regulation recently, finally, around buy now pay later services. They're pretty light touch, I will say, and a lot of people who work in the financial literacy, financial counselling and even financial legal rights space still think there's a long way to go. In June this year, amendments were made to our National Credit Code, essentially meaning that buy now pay pay later services now have to comply with what's known as responsible lending obligations. They also have to hold credit licenses, and they have to become a member of our Australian Financial Complaints Authority, also known as AFCA. The regulation, as I said, is certainly a step in the right direction, but it is very light touch. Essentially, these buy now pay later services and providers can choose whether or not they want to comply with the full version of the responsible lending obligations, which involves things like performing a credit check on individuals who are basically applying to use their services, basically to make sure that they actually have financial capacity to pay back and make those repayments. And that can also lead to putting in place a particular limit on that individual so that they don't dramatically exceed what they can actually afford, and kind of to prevent these companies from irresponsibly giving out money to people who could never pay back that kind of amount of money. So it does effectively put a bit more onus on these companies themselves to do these credit checks. The regulations now also give users of buy now pay later services the right to request financial hardship considerations in the event that they can't meet a particular payment, and also people are able to approach the Australian Financial Complaints Authority if they're finding that these buy now pay later services are effectively not complying with these new regulations. This is really great, as I said, and hopefully will mitigate irresponsible lending to an extent. However, obviously there's loopholes, right? And what I find so crazy about this is that there's this full version, but there's also like a light version, which is called a modified responsible lending framework, which effectively means that buy now pay later services and providers can opt to go for this modified option, which means that yes, they still have to do credit checks on people if they're trying to use their services and apply for these services, but their checks don't really have to be as thorough if the amount of money is a lower amount of money that the person's trying to use their services for. As we now know, a lot of people who use these services just use them for things like their weekly groceries and their basic necessities. A lot of these things do fall under the $2,000 threshold. There's clearly a big gap there. Drew McRae, who's from the Financial Rights Legal Centre here in Australia, told the ABC that there's still a major concern that there aren't that many regulations as to how many buy now pay later service accounts that individual people can have. Buy now pay later services are not going to communicate with each other. There's no limit on how many of these you can open up, and therefore there's no limit on effectively the amount of debt that you can cumulatively accrue. And then we turn to the biggest problem of all, which is really not necessarily the regulations when it comes to these companies. Obviously, they require regulation, and I'm really glad that we're going in that direction. Clearly, if people needing to use these services are existing below and at the poverty line, then I think there's a bigger problem at play here, right? The fact that these companies are coming in and effectively occupying the space that the state really should be occupying when it comes to social welfare payments, it shows that those social welfare payments are simply inadequate to address what people need on an everyday basis. It's not that these people who are on social welfare payments are using buy now pay later services to buy new outfits. It's that they're using them for their children's clothing, their children's food, their utilities. If you have to use services that can put you in a debt spiral for these things, something isn't adding up when it comes to the amount of money that the state is assisting you with. Something is not quite working here. And I have to say, one of the most notable examples, I think, of this is the fact that the payment that goes to women survivors who are fleeing domestic violence clearly isn't enough if these people are having to put themselves at risk to just fund their daily necessities. Often women fleeing domestic violence haven't had access to any bank accounts. Often financial abuse has been at play. Often this is also because if women had their own finances, their abuser knows that this would assist them in escaping that relationship. A service like Buy Now Pay Later is going to provide some assistance in that regard. The problem is that if it does then lead you into a debt spiral, the risk of you returning to that relationship just for security is much more heightened. Anyway, I found this topic really, really fascinating. There's still so much more that needs to be done. I'm just really fascinated about this topic, and I think it's something that we need to speak about a lot more, because the fact that it's so gendered is kind of insane, particularly among vulnerable women. It's just something that we definitely need more reform in. I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sending Sending so much love. I hope you guys are doing well. And yeah, bye.